Hello, our lovely creatures of darkness. I'm Shade.
And I'm Decay.
And welcome back to the Hallowed Throne. Before we start our video, here is the disclaimer. The video is autographically violent. The following video has sound effects of children crying. But absolutely no child was hurt in the making of this video. Viewer discretion is advised. It was 10 o'clock on a lovely summer morning. A perfect day for things to take a disastrous turn. Kevin held a gun up to Pete's head. Pete was one of the chosen scientists who helped create the projects and experiment for the company. They were standing outside the company building in a secret location where no one would think to find them. Kevin made sure no one was around when he began to lead Pete to the back of the building. Pete was 5'11", wearing a gray suit jacket with matching tie and pants. He wore dark brown dress shoes and had a white lab coat thrown over his formal clothing. He had short, dark brown hair and wore spectacles. Kevin was 6 feet tall, wearing a black suit jacket, black and silver silk tie, white button-down shirt, black dress pants, and black dress shoes. He looked very sleek and stylish for someone at his age. Pete had never been to the area him and Kevin were at before. He was really confused about the whole ordeal, but he went along with it because he had no other choice. They entered the building and walked into a corridor. The lights were very dim to protect the identity of the location. They walked a few doors down until they stopped at a specific door. With the gun still pointed at Pete's head, Kevin opened the door with his free hand and pushed him into a dimly lit room. He forced him into a steel chair that sat in the center of the room, then duct taped his mouth shut and handcuffed his hands behind his back. The lone chair was the only piece of furniture in the medium-sized concrete room. A man and woman stood next to each other at the back of the room. The Russian man stood at 7 feet tall, and he was wearing a white tank top, dark blue jeans, and black combat boots. He had short blonde hair, blue eyes, and a dark tanned complexion. He was very muscular and had a tattoo that said, "Let's have fun in Russia," etched vertically on the back of each finger of his right hand. Margaret, the second CEO, had a thin frame. She stood at 5'10" and was wearing a black professional skirt and a white collared shirt. Her hair was tied back in a bun, and she wore a white pearl necklace with matching earrings. She also had on black high heels. Margaret and the Russian man stepped toward Pete. The Russian held a small glass bottle that held a clear liquid substance inside, the nucleotide liquid chemical. Pete looked up frightfully, his body shook in fear.
"Hello, Pete,"
said Margaret.
"Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm sure you're wondering what we have here in this small bottle, and I'm sure you know by now what it is."
She continued.
"It's the chemical we need you to put in effect for us. You will take this and do as we have instructed you to do,"
she said sternly. Kevin stood watching near the doorway behind Pete. Pete didn't make a sound. He just looked at Margaret and listened to what she had to say. The Russian then placed the bottle in Pete's lab coat pocket.
"Once you carry out the plan,"
Margaret continued,
You're too quickly to make your way out of the building. Only use the exits we have instructed you to use. When you're at the finish line, your wife and children will be waiting for you. We have decided to be generous for what we've put you through and have placed $125 million in a briefcase along with the cure to the deadly chemical for you and your family.
There was a moment of silence for a few seconds before Margaret continued.
Oh, and one more thing.
The Russian walked to the back of the room and retrieved a small pad from a stainless steel briefcase. He then handed Margaret the pad, and she typed in some words and numbers on the screen. Then, she turned the pad around so Pete could view it. His family was on the screen. It was a live feed. Their mouths were duct taped and a rope was tied around their legs and torsos. They were in a chamber of some sort, but Pete couldn't make out where they were. They were on the ground whimpering and sweating, huddling up together in a corner. Pete began to panic and moan as sweat dripped down from his forehead to his lips, dampening the duct tape on his mouth. His face turned a reddish hue from being nervous and pissed off all at the same time.
If you fail us in any way, just remember our little deal. I'll show you what a real bitch I am. I'll kill your fucking family.
Margaret said evilly, stepping close to Pete, hovering and breathing heavily over him. He could feel her hot breath against his face. The scent of her rose and lavender perfume traveled up into his nose, and all he wanted her to do was back away from him. Margaret took a step back and stared at him as if he was an untamed animal. Kevin walked over and unlocked Pete's cuffs. The cuffs, being too tight, left some indents on his wrists. Then the Russian grabbed him by the arms and pulled him up onto his feet. Pete was terrified of the Russian. Kevin grabbed his forearm, removed the duct tape from his mouth, and escorted him out of the room and out the building. Pete rubbed his wrists a bit to help relieve the pain he incurred from the cuffs.
Now, get the fuck out of here,
Kevin yelled to Pete. He walked away in a rush from the location that Kevin took him to. He was frightened and nervous at the same time. He didn't want to go through this torture, nor did he want to be held responsible for what was about to be played out. He knew that he had no choice but to do this. Otherwise, they would kill him and his family. There were no second chances, and there was no going back. This was Pete's destiny. At 12 p.m., 5 scientists, one of them Pete, entered a high white laboratory. The scientists that were all in the room were the ones that had previously worked on the experiment and 2 projects. They were all together to run some last-minute tests on a previous designated creature that Kevin requested them to take care of. This was all part of the plan so that Pete could do his dirty deed for the CEOs. A woman named Andrea walked toward a huge machine in the corner of the room and turned it on. As the machine started up, certain parts of it began to spin around and around in a clockwise pattern. A thin, white, wispy fog emanated from the middle of the machine, and then its core, where the fog was coming out of, dropped down to its base. Inside the middle of the machine, glass tubes filled with blue liquid were arranged in a circle, erected, and the biotissues were floating inside each tube. After about a minute, the liquid drained out of the glass tubes, and they all opened up. Andrea grabbed one piece of tissue and placed it on the sterilized tray. She carried it to the operating table and waited for everyone else to finish grabbing what they needed for the surgery. 2 male scientists, Jason and Alex, walked into a freezer and wheeled out the frozen creature they were going to work on. This creature wasn't like anything anyone had ever seen before. There were small ice crystals formed all around its body. A woman named Lauren went to help Jason and Alex lift the creatures up onto the table to begin the surgery. Pete put gloves on and walked over to the machine Andrea went to, taking another piece of tissue. He smuggled it into another glass bottle and put it in his lab coat pocket before anyone could see him. Then he pressed a button to the machine and the glass tubes rose back up, filling up with the blue liquid. Then the machine's core closed back up.
Pete, can you grab the medical supplies, please?
Asked Andrea. Sure, replied Pete.
Thanks.
Andrea said politely. Alex and Jason wheeled the heavy cart back into the freezer and closed it up. As Pete walked to the other side of the room to retrieve the supplies, he took out the liquid chemical and dumped it into the glass bottle that contained the biotissue. In a non-suspicious way, he looked over his shoulder to see if anyone was looking at him, but they weren't. They were all distracted and focused on getting the creature ready for the surgical procedure. He shook the bottle quickly and rapidly and placed it back into his pocket, walking toward the table where all 4 scientists were gathered. When he arrived, he placed the supplies down for everyone to use.
All right. Is everyone ready to begin?
Asked Lauren. Yup. Let's proceed, replied Jason. Pete, pretending he was looking for something, ran his hands up and down his lab coat. He then used this moment as a decoy to leave the room. Damn, I forgot something, Pete blurted out.
What?
Asked Alex, giving him a look of curiosity. My ID card. I left it in my locker, he replied as he continued to search his person.
Do you want to go get it now?
Asked Andrea.
Or can I wait until we're finished up here?
No, I'd rather get it now. God forbid the supervisors come in to do ID checks and I don't have mine on me. The last thing I want is to get written up for something so stupid, replied Pete.
Okay. Try to hurry up so we can finish this last procedure.
Andrea said. Alright, I will, Pete said lastly as he left the lab in a rush. As he ran out of the room and into the corridor, something was happening rapidly inside the glass bottle in his pocket. The liquid chemical was starting to make its effects on the biotissue. The DNA strands that were in the tissue, with the combination of the liquid chemical, began to form a virus that would soon become airborne once it hit the water supply system. The nucleotide bases stopped the process of the DNA strand from rewinding itself and had some kind of enzyme that was able to block the helix rings when they separated, causing the airborne virus to form. Pete walked quickly down corridors, passing some offices and other small laboratories. He followed the directions that Margaret and Kevin gave him that was scribbled out on a small piece of ripped paper. He passed former co-workers that he had worked with previously, trying not to act or seem suspicious in any way. He feared that if they stopped him, they would somehow compromise his mission or find him to be acting very odd. He was still very nervous, and his heart began to beat frantically. He started to feel sick to his stomach, but he didn't dare stop. He had a gut feeling that Kevin and Margaret were watching him. He finally made his way to the room that read on the door, Building Water System, Authorized Personnel Only. With one last glance, he looked to see if anyone was coming, and when the coast was clear, he went inside and shut the door behind him. He leaned back against the door and shut his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them and saw many machines and pipes in the room. There was a great deal of humming and rattling coming from the pipes along the steam escaping from certain pipage on the ceiling. There was a main tank in the center of the huge room, and Pete walked over to it and climbed up a ladder that was on the side of it that led up to a hatch with a large red valve on it. When he was up on the tank's platform, he turned the valve with all his muscle and opened the hatch. Warm air escaped from inside the tank and blew into Pete's face. When it was opened all the way, he took out the glass bottle from within his pocket, studying it for a few seconds. He procrastinated about pouring the liquid chemical in, but he shook out his little funk and poured the substance into the water. The water system led to drinking fountains, experimental tanks, restrooms, break rooms, kitchens, and it even traveled to the outside of the building, connecting to another main pipe that led to other buildings on the island. Pete stared at the water. His eyes widened with fear and couldn't believe what he had just done. He was in complete shock as his hands trembled. He would be the cause of everyone's death on the island. This would be the biggest burden he would ever carry for the rest of his life. The glass bottle fell out of his shaking hands and into the tank, causing the water to splash up into the air. Then he snapped back into reality. He quickly closed the hatch, got out of the water supply room, and ran for the exit that Margaret and Kevin instructed him to escape to. Once he reached the exit that he was to arrive at, he saw the two steel briefcases sitting on the cold concrete floor, perched up against the wall. Pete quickly rushed over to the briefcases and kneeled down near them. He opened up one of them, and there was all the money he was promised. Beside the case with the money was the next briefcase. He opened it up, and a cold, thick, white, foamy fog rolling out into the air like a wisping cloud. The cure to the deadly liquid chemical substance was inside the barrels of 4 needles that were all lined up next to one another. After he took one out, he quickly rolled up his sleeve and without any hesitation jabbed himself on the side of his left arm. After injecting all the cure into his system, he threw the empty needle on the floor, causing the glass barrel to break. Then he closed both cases, picked them up, and proceeded to walk out the door. He was finally out in the open, out of the building at last. The light hit Pete's face, and he smiled as if he had never seen daylight before. He inhaled and exhaled like he never took a breath of fresh air in his life. Up ahead of him, sitting on the ground, was his family, who were petrified. The Russian worker, Margaret, and Kevin all stood by Pete's family, waiting for his arrival. When they saw him barging through the exit, Kevin smiled and began to speak to him.
Well, you made it out. I'm sure you did what you were instructed to do.
Kevin said happily. Pete gave Kevin a look of disgust. I've done what you've asked. Now please, agree to your end of the bargain and let my family go, cried out Pete, begging to the CEOs. Margaret proceeded to walk slowly toward Pete.
We have a small problem,
continued Kevin. What is it this time? What do you need from me? Asked Pete in a state of panic. I just want to leave with my family. I want to go home. Please, let us go, he cried out. He kneeled to the ground, begging both CEOs for mercy.
We can't let you go, nor your family. Here at the virtual Copperhead Company, we strive to be number one. Strive to be successful in everything we do. We strive to keep certain things in secrecy and keep certain things at a maximum perfection. We work really hard at this. You, of all people, should know this by now. You have a bomb planted inside of your brain. This is nothing new to your knowledge.
Margaret said with a smile on her face, shrugging her shoulders.
It's something I shouldn't have to repeat. I don't like wasting my time repeating myself, nor do I like to waste my precious breath and talk about something if it's already been said before.
She continued as she began to pace back and forth, putting one hand behind her back and the other making gestures.
And with the fact that we keep things secret, we cannot risk letting you go. You know too much already. Do you think we were going to let you just waltz away just like that and let you keep our hard-earned, crisp, clean blood money? Fuck no. Do I look stupid to you, Pete? Do I?
Continued Margaret as she began to chuckle. She stopped speaking and let Kevin have the show to say his piece.
That serum we left for you? Did you honestly think that would save you and your family?
Asked Kevin.
Bad news for you, but that wasn't the cure to the soon-to-be infection. It was just tap water mixed with a bit of food dye. We were already pissed that we had to waste 4 perfectly good needles on you, along with the dye we had. We don't have enough serum to go around to waste on nobodies. You are a nobody. Our employees are nobodies. Your family are nobodies.
Continued Kevin.
Do you get where I'm getting at, Pete? Our serum is too expensive and too precious to just give away on someone who isn't going to survive this upcoming apocalypse. To someone who is a weak link, to a pathetic walking corpse. You'd be dead along with your family even before you got off this island to escape this upcoming infection.
Pete just stared at Margaret and Kevin and then turned to look at the Russian, who was standing near his family. He couldn't say a word. He was speechless. He couldn't take any more of this bullshit. Not for another second. It had to end now, and both Margaret and Kevin had gone too far by taking his family hostage. He hated them both, and he hated the fact that he was played. He wanted the Russian to move away from his scared and defenseless family and wanted to protect them. Without thinking, he ran toward Margaret to try and tackle her to the ground, but the Russian immediately ran to Pete and knocked him to the ground first. Kevin took out his silenced pistol and smacked Pete's wife across the face with the back of his gun. His wife hit the ground as the side of her head slammed against it with force. Dirt covered half of her face and hair, and on the other side was a big red mark from having been hit so hard with the gun. Blood began to drip out her nose and the side of her mouth.
Whoa, holy shit. Take it easy. You're making very bad choices. You don't want to make the wrong one and have your wife and children's brains scattered all over the ground like dice on a really fucked up board game.
Margaret said, laughing. I'm gonna kill you, you fucking bitch, yelled Pete.
Oh, please. I've heard that bullshit before. Save it for someone who fears the threats and actually gives a fuck.
Margaret said, rolling her eyes. The Russian was still on top of him. He picked him up by his white lab coat and pushed him even further back as dirt covered the back of his lab coat and dress pants.
Tisk, tisk, tisk. I'm sorry to tell you this, but today you get to watch your family die right before your very eyes. How lucky are you? Not many families have this opportunity.
Margaret said.
Oh, how I love us. Don't you agree, darling?
Asked Margaret, turning to Kevin smiling. She walked over to him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him passionately.
"That's right, sweetie. I'll do anything for you,"
replied Kevin, smiling at Margaret. "My family doesn't know anything," Pete said, interrupting their moment of romance.
"They don't deserve this cruel punishment."
"Spare their lives, and you can have me all to yourselves. Torture me, kill me, do whatever it is that you please. Just let them go," he pleaded. Kevin stared at Pete and then looked at Margaret. He folded his arms and then looked back at Pete as if he was thinking about taking him up on his offer.
"Sorry. Everyone must be sacrificed. It's for the good of the company and this island. We have to control overpopulation somehow,"
laughed Kevin. And with that, he aimed his silenced pistol at Pete's wife's head and blasted a hole through her temple. The children screamed and cried as they watched their mother die right before them. Brain particles and blood lashed up on the children's faces and the ground. Pete yelled out in agony as he watched his wife die. His eyes widened and the veins in his neck bulged out to the surface of his skin. His eyes became a bloodshot red, and his face turned red like a tomato. Tears streamed down his face like a waterfall. The Russian grabbed Pete and held him so he wouldn't try to stop Kevin as he executed his family. Then Kevin aimed the gun at the children next. "I love you!" yelled Pete to his children as he tried to escape out of the Russian's grip. The children huddled together. They didn't dare look at Kevin. They didn't want the last image they ever saw was to be looking at him. After Pete said that, Kevin shot and killed the children. It was all over. Margaret and Kevin had won yet again.
"Kill the worthless bastard,"
Margaret told the Russian as she waved her hand toward Pete's direction.
"Certainly,"
the Russian said with his deep Russian accent. He let go of Pete and aimed his silenced pistol at him. Pete closed his eyes and imagined everything so vividly about his life. His wife and kids were his everything. His whole life was flashing right before his very eyes in milliseconds. His heart was beating frantically, and his adrenaline was pumping throughout his entire body. Then the Russian shot him in the head. They all watched as Pete's lifeless body fell backwards, hitting the ground. Blood poured out of his wound in his head as it stained the dirt a dark red.
"Grab the briefcase with the money,"
ordered Margaret to the Russian. He grabbed the briefcase like she ordered him to do and followed behind her.
"Let's get the fuck out of here,"
said Kevin. All three of them ran toward an army vehicle that was nearby, hopped in, and drove off into the clearing. It was time for the workers in the building to begin to use the water system. As they drank the H2O and used it, the employees began to feel something weird inside their body. Change began to happen in their lungs as they breathed in the oxygen. It felt as their lungs were about to burst like an overblown balloon. What was happening in their body was the oxygen they were intaking clung to nitrogen in the air. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did since the liquid chemical substance was put into the water system. The employees released the carbon dioxide from their lungs. Their lungs burst open, killing them instantly. Their veins turned an orange-reddish hue, and their skin swelled up with welches the size of golf balls. The water affected experiments that were immersed in tanks that were set in different laboratories in many different buildings. They, too, began to physically change. Soon all the buildings were in a major catastrophe. The surviving employees were panicking, running around in complete chaos. It was all over. At 5 p.m., every single person inside the main building was dead, and at 6 p.m., the entire island was silent. everything came to a halt. But the experiments were alive, infected, and worse than ever, ready to be released. The virtual Copperhead Company had come to an end that day, and the agents that were on their way there didn't even know what was in store for them. We hope you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and send that bell notification to the darkest deeps of hell. A special shout out goes to Creepy Clown Girl for playing Margaret and PA Nightmares for playing Kevin. If you loved their work, and I'm sure you do, make sure to check out their links in the description below. A special shout out also goes to our patrons, Lucy Rosado and Justin Rosado. If you too would like to become a creature of darkness here in the Hollow Throne, make sure to visit us on Patreon. The link for that will be in the description below. Otherwise, have a wonderful night here in the Hollow Throne. And remember,
We're always watching.